A single shipyard in China now produces more ships every year than all of the American shipyards combined. Think of that.
April 2nd, 2025, a big day in global trade. US President Donald Trump steps up to the podium with a bold announcement.
For these reasons, starting tomorrow, the United States will implement reciprocal tariffs on other nations. It's been a long time since we even thought of that.
The new tariffs are part of Trump's new strategy of putting America first, which he promised during the campaigns.
We will make America wealthy again. We will make America proud again. And yes, together, we will make America great again.
President Trump's new trade plan introduces higher tariffs on goods entering the United States. He says it's about bringing manufacturing back to America, protecting U.S. jobs, and pushing back against what he calls unfair trade practices from other countries. But what do tariffs mean? And why would Trump use them? Against other states, how would the Mau Mau have responded to the tariffs? Trump's tariffs are expected to have serious implications on African economies. However, Africans are usually slow to grasp the full import of international developments, even while they bear directly on the fate of the continent. As we analyze the implications of these tariffs on Africa in general and Kenya in particular, it's important that we explain what tariffs mean. So, let's break it down. A tariff is essentially a tax that one country places on goods coming in from another country. It's applied at the border, and the importer, usually a business, is the one who pays it. So, let's say Kenya exports shirts to the US. If the US government imposes a 10% tariff, then an American buyer has to pay 10% more on top of the price of those shirts. That cost doesn't just disappear, it usually gets passed on to retailers and ultimately to consumers. In simple terms, Kenyan shirts become more expensive on American shelves. Now, why would a country want to do that? The logic behind tariffs is to make imported goods less attractive, giving locally made products a competitive edge, thus spurring the manufacturing sector and creating jobs in the process.
Jobs and factories will come roaring back into our country, and you see it happening already. We will supercharge our domestic industrial base. We will pry open foreign markets and break down foreign trade barriers. And ultimately, more production at home will mean stronger competition and lower prices for consumers. This will be indeed the golden age of America. It's coming back. We're going to come back very strongly.
It's a way to protect domestic industries, especially those that are struggling to survive against cheaper imports. But here's the flip side. Tariffs can backfire. History provides a number of examples where tariffs produced unintended consequences. In 1930, in the middle of the Great Depression, the US government passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. It raised tariffs on more than 20,000 imported goods, hoping to protect American jobs and industries. But it did the opposite. Other countries retaliated by raising their own tariffs. International trade collapsed, global economic tensions deepened, and the world economy already fragile, spiraled even further into depression. America was only saved from this depression by the war economy associated with the Second World War. Fast forward to 2018 to 2019, and we saw another example under the Trump administration. The US imposed hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs on Chinese goods, claiming China had unfair trade practices and intellectual property theft. China hit back with its own tariffs, especially on US agricultural exports like soybeans and pork. American farmers lost access to their largest export market. Prices rose across industries, and the result was a trade war that disrupted global supply chains, slowed down manufacturing, and created months of uncertainty for businesses and governments worldwide.
They will be because we never charge anybody.
And now, here we are again, 2025, with a fresh wave of US tariffs, this time affecting nearly every continent, including Africa. This time, the targets aren't just global powerhouses like China or the EU. Even countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, and Ghana, who export mainly textiles, flowers, and food, are now caught in the ripple effects of shifting American trade policy. These may not be traditional trade rivals, but they are still collateral damage in a world where protectionism is on the rise and cooperation is on the decline. So yes, a tariff may look like just a number on paper, but in reality is a lever of power, one that can change the price of goods, shake economies, and reshape global trade relationships overnight.
39%, we're going to charge them 20%, so we're charging them essentially half.
When the new US tariff list was released, one thing became painfully clear. Africa was not left out of the equation. But what stood out even more was how unevenly the continent was treated. Kenya, Ghana, and Ethiopia were assigned the lowest tariff rate, 10%. While still a setback, this rate is significantly lower than tariffs imposed on other regions globally. For these countries, it offers a short-lived edge in remaining competitive in the US market. A cushion, but a thin one. Others weren't as lucky. Take Lesotho, a small landlocked country where over 40% of formal jobs are in the textile and garment industry. Tiny Lesotho was slapped with a staggering 50% tariff. That's not just a trade adjustment. It's a direct hit to thousands of livelihoods, threatening to undo years of hard-earned export growth under AGOA.
That we're going to do quite quickly is to visit Washington and meet with the relevant authorities, the executive there, and we have to show them our case and make a case for Lesotho to be given its rightful tariff. We do understand that we have a new government in power in the United States with a different policy altogether, and we do not have a problem with. We just have a problem with being evaluated using the wrong tariffs.
Madagascar, another apparel heavyweight, was hit with a 47% tariff. The country had only recently begun rebuilding its fragile manufacturing base. Now, that recovery hangs in the balance. Botswana and Angola, both trying to shift from resource dependence to diversified export-led growth, were assigned 37% and 32% tariffs, respectively. These penalties risk choking off nascent industries just as they begin to take roots. Even South Africa, the continent's most advanced and diversified economy, wasn't spared. A 30% tariff lands squarely at a time when the country is already navigating diplomatic strains with Western allies over its foreign policy positions and BRICS realignment.
We are a sovereign country and we can decide on any matter that has to do with our international dealings with others. And so it is within our right, as it is within their right. They have imposed tariffs, and we are examining the impact of those tariffs on us. And as the Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition said, we will be able to state what our position is.
And then there's Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, which received a 14% tariff. The US labeled this a reciprocal measure, citing Nigeria's own high import duties on American goods. But in a country where inflation is already surging and oil revenues are shrinking, this move could deepen trade imbalances and stoke further economic pressure. What's clear is that Africa wasn't treated as a unified bloc. It was dissected almost surgically, based on perceived trade behavior, economic influence, strategic location, or political posture. Some countries were cushioned, perhaps to reward alignment or strategic value. Others were penalized, possibly as a warning shot or retaliation. But overall, the message was mixed and the treatment fragmented. Take the surprising and unusually high tariffs that Southern Africa states were slapped with. There is logic in this. America is currently unhappy with South Africa, which has joined BRICS and has been very vocal in opposition to Israel, a key US ally in its war against Gaza. It would appear that America wants to force small, poor South African neighbors to negotiate with it. Because they are weak, there will not be much of negotiations, and the states will most likely agree to any demand by the United States, up to and including allowing military bases in those countries. What is particularly alarming is that, despite the serious implications of the new tariffs, African countries have yet to issue any firm or coordinated response. By introducing these unexpected tariffs, America has succeeded in disrupting the rule-based world trade regime that it has helped build since World War II, including the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and the World Trade Organization, or the WTO. These trade institutions and regimes, although still skewed against developing nations, at least provided a semblance of fairness and equality. Following the introduction of the new tariffs, African states are exactly where they were before the Berlin Conference of 1885, economically weak, alone, and open to the most exploitative form of imperialism, colonialism. If African states can't hang together, they will once again be hanged separately, as each weak state is forced to negotiate for itself from a position of weakness. Without a collective stance, Africa risks being sidelined again in decisions that profoundly affect its economic future. This absence of a clear stance or coordinated strategy to counter or negotiate the tariffs stands in stark contrast to the responses of other nations, many of which have swiftly retaliated, igniting what is now being referred to as a new wave of global trade wars.
Hearing from the Chinese President Xi Jinping himself, Xi saying that his nation is, quote unquote, not afraid, and also warning, quote, there are no winners in a trade war, and going against the world will only lead to self-isolation.
We are responding with countermeasures worth 26 billion euros. This matches the economic scope of the tariffs of the United States.
In a world where economic alliances shift rapidly and retaliation is the new language of diplomacy, silence is not neutrality. It's surrender. Africa's hesitation to act as one risks repeating a familiar pattern, reacting too late, with too little, and on unequal terms. If the continent is to claim its rightful place in global trade, it must rise with one voice, one strategy, and one vision, or risk watching its future be negotiated without it. Kenya's trade relationship with the United States is strategic, growing, and deeply interconnected with jobs and livelihoods across the country. The United States is Kenya's fifth largest export market, with trade between the two countries valued at around $1.2 billion. While Kenya may not be among the world's largest exporters by volume, the nature of its exports, labor-intensive, value-added, and high-quality products makes trade with the U.S. uniquely impactful. Today, the United States is one of Kenya's top export markets outside Africa, and that relationship has been shaped largely by preferential trade agreements like AGOA. Kenya's top exports to the U.S. reflect its economic diversity and potential.
Textiles and apparel produced in export processing zones, a sector that directly employs over 60,000 workers, the majority of them women, and supports hundreds of thousands more indirectly through supply chains, transport, and logistics. Coffee and tea, Kenya's world-renowned Arabica beans and Highland teas are not just global favorites, but key sources of foreign exchange and rural employment. Cut flowers, especially roses, Kenya is one of the world's largest flower exporters, and US supermarkets and florists are a growing market. Fresh fruits and vegetables, including avocados, green beans, and mangoes, which are increasingly finding space in US produce aisles.
These exports are not just commodities. They represent real livelihoods. Farmers in Kirinyaga, packhouse workers in Naivasha, EPZ'd seamstresses in Athi River. They all depend on a steady flow of orders from overseas markets like the US. So, when US trade policies shift, when tariffs rise or agreements like AGOA are left hanging in uncertainty, the impact is felt far beyond policy circles. It reaches the factory floor, the smallholder farm, and the informal trader. For Kenya, maintaining access to the US market isn't just a matter of diplomacy. It's a cornerstone of industrialization, job creation, and economic stability. The 10% tariff against Kenyan products makes Kenyan products more expensive in the US. For the textile sector, a key AGOA beneficiary, That's a serious concern. Retailers may switch suppliers. Orders could drop. Factories might cut back. The biggest impact will be on the workers as jobs will be lost. The effect will be most felt by women, who constitute a large segment in export processing zones where the apparels are made. Jobs that mean income, independence, and dignity could be at risk. A simple policy tweak in the US will thousands to poverty and affect Kenya's efforts to industrialize. Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa are among the leading African nations that have benefited from a pivotal trade agreement with the United States, AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act. AGOA was signed into US law in 2000 by President Bill Clinton. At the time, it was seen as a landmark effort to reset US-Africa economic relations, moving beyond aid to mutual trade and investment. The inspiration behind AGOA was clear: to support economic growth and democratic reform in sub-Saharan Africa by opening access to the vast US consumer market and helping African countries transition from commodity dependency to value-added exports. Under AGOA, eligible African countries, those meeting basic governance and human rights benchmarks, were granted duty-free and quota-free access to the US for over 6,000 product lines, including textiles, apparel, agricultural goods, and manufactured items. Initially set to run for 8 years, AGOA was extended multiple times in 2004 and again in 2015, and has since become a cornerstone of US-Africa trade. The impact? AGOA helped jumpstart Africa's textile and apparel industries, especially in countries like Kenya, Lesotho, and Ethiopia. It also boosted non-traditional exports, from leather goods in Ethiopia to automotive components in South Africa. And it gave African businesses the confidence to invest, knowing they had preferential access to one of the world's largest markets. In Kenya, AGOA has been a game changer. The apparel sector, centered in export processing zones, expanded rapidly, employing tens of thousands of Kenyans, most of them young women. Products like uniforms, workwear, and casual clothing found a stable market in US retail chains. And Kenya's flour and coffee exports also gained momentum. But now, with AGOA set to expire in September 2025, the future is uncertain. What was once a symbol of long-term partnership is now under review, and the arrival of new US tariffs, while AGOA is still in effect, raises serious questions. Will AGOA be renewed? Will its terms be revised for Kenya and many others? This is not just about policy. It's about economic survival, job security, and regional competitiveness. Without AGOA, the cost of doing business with the US could rise dramatically, pushing African exporters out of the market and undoing years of economic progress built on the back of this agreement. This could be a turning point. AGOA once symbolized US goodwill, a bridge for African industry. But with its expiry looming and the US leaning toward protectionism, Africa must reconsider its trade path. Kenya is already negotiating a bilateral free trade agreement with the US. Others are eyeing eastern markets or boosting regional trade under AFCFTA. There's also a bigger shift: value addition. Africa is investing in processing, packaging, and manufacturing, aiming to export finished products, not just raw materials. What comes next in Africa-US trade will be shaped by bold policy choices and the continent's ability to adapt. So, here's the truth. It's time for Africa to take its future into its own hands. With a population of over 1.5 billion people, untold mineral wealth, millions of acres of arable land, good climate, adequate water resources, and oceans, Africa has the basics for building a dominant world economy. However, the continent has always been held back by lack of strategy, poor leadership, greed, foreign interference, and disregard of its own culture and religion. Recent attempts to unite the continent, such as the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, which promises a $3.4 trillion intra-African market, have not effectively taken off. The promise of truly free trade across African borders still feels just out of reach. Implementation is slow, political will is uneven. The opportunity, still massive, but only if the continent acts in unison. This moment is a wake-up call. It's telling Africa that relying heavily on external partners like the US and China is no longer sustainable. Tariffs, like the ones we've seen recently from the US, are reminders that global alliances can shift overnight. So, what are the options? Africa must go back to the comprehensive freedom that the Mau Mau and other liberation movements in Africa were fighting for. Africa's liberation movements wanted more than national flags and anthems. In the case of Mau Mau, they were fighting for land and freedom. Indeed, the official name of Mau Mau was the Kenya Land and Freedom Army. In this name, the word land, which comes before freedom in the title, was a metaphor for the economy. For the entire range of economic activities, livelihoods at that time was based on land. As the Colonial Internal Security Working Committee put it in their report to the governor on November 27, 1951.
The main underlying factors which condition the climate of anti-European feeling amongst Africans are the disparity of wealth, land, hunger, the urge to run their own affairs, feelings of racial discrimination.
The Mau Mau fighters themselves were even clearer in expressing their objectives. When asked by the colonial government, "Why are you fighting?" the Kenya Parliament, formed in the forest by Mau Mau, replied,
"We are fighting for all lands stolen from us by the Crown through its Orders in Council of 1915, according to which Africans have been evicted from the Kenya Highlands. The British government must grant Kenya full independence under African leadership and hand over all land previously alienated for distribution to the landless. We will fight until we achieve freedom or until the last of our warriors has shed his last drop of blood."
Such are the ideals of economic freedom set by African nationalists. The nationalists had visions of grandeur, a continent able to feed itself, educate its children, provide healthcare, and defend its people against external aggression. The American tariffs provide a perfect opportunity for Africans to reclaim the vision of the freedom fighters and pursue real freedom, not dependency baptized as freedom. In pursuit of economic freedom, Africa must double down on intra-African trade. AfCFTA isn't just a policy, it's a strategy for resilience. Africa must also diversify export destinations by looking more seriously to Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and other emerging markets. And above all, Africa must invest in African value chains so that it is not just exporting raw materials, but finished goods with real value. Just like America, Africa must protect its nascent industries, as this will provide jobs that will prevent Africans from taking risky journeys abroad where they endure discrimination. Africa needs to be proactive, strategic, and unapologetically ambitious. Its leaders, who have been a big letdown, must wake up. African leaders must commit to a new ethos of freedom, even if it means subscribing to the Mau Mau Oath, part of which stated, "I shall never sell our country to imperialists and colonialists, or cease to fight for our land occupied by the colonialists until I die. If I ever betray this oath, may the oath kill me."